What's your best example of when a villain was right? Story 1. Shere Khan from the Jungle Book, the 2016 live-action version. He comes during the drought, sees the man cub, and warns everyone of the damage he can do. That he's a cub now, but will become a man, and man is forbidden from the jungle. So, what does Mowgli do? He steals fire from the human village, brings it to the jungle, and causes a fire that probably ended a lot of animals before the elephants showed up and put it out. Story 2. Mr. Crocker from the Fairly Odd Parents. Sure, he was a bit crazy and did some bad stuff, but if it weren't for Cosmo being stupid and annoying self as usual, Mr. Crocker wouldn't have lost Cosmo, and Wanda and his life would have been great again. The thing is, though, if he didn't believe fairies existed, he probably would have chosen a different occupation instead of being an elementary school teacher, which he 100% chose so that he can prove fairies are real, because he knew that fairies only appeared for children. Story 3. The head chef in Ratatouille. He was wrong about some stuff, but was 100% right in not wanting rats in the kitchen cooking. I'd say that's the only thing he was right about, though. I hate the narrative that the head chef in Ratatouille was seen as a villain just because he doesn't want a rat in the kitchen. But that's not at all correct. He was actively trying to sabotage and conceal that the restaurant was rightfully Linguini's. And yeah, it sucks that you were so close to inheriting it. And that changed essentially at the last minute, but it's the rules. Sucks to suck. He also was trying to commercialize Gusteau, which was so against what Gusteau wanted. The man was so passionate about his restaurant, he up and died when they lost a Michelin star. Story 4. Count Dooku, in the end, was moved by genuine anger towards the Senate's corruption, but the dark side corrupted him into a mirror of the corruption he hated, in the service of the one who benefited the most from said corruption. Count Dooku is an elegant character that is criminally underrated. I think my favorite thing about that is that even though he'd been corrupted by the dark side, he still held his ideals. He knew the entire time that Palpatine was as bad as any other member of the Senate, and that he would hurt the galaxy more if left in power. He just thought he'd be able to play the game and assassinated Palpatine after everything was said and done, and guide the galaxy to prosperity himself. Story pet. Zemo in Captain America, Civil War. My father lived outside the city. I thought we would be safe there. My son was excited. He could see Iron Man from the car window. I told my wife, "Don't worry, they're fighting in the city. We're miles from harm." When the dust cleared and the screaming stopped, it took me 2 days until I found their bodies. My father is still holding my wife and son in his arms. And the Avengers? They went home. That scene made me feel sorry for Zemo, but also made me fall in love with T'Challa, because he could have easily assassinated Zemo out of revenge. No one would have blamed him. Like, no one blamed Tony for raging out in the same scene. But instead, T'Challa went for justice, and that was far more noble and disciplined. Story 6. Pierce Brosnan in Mrs. Doubtfire talks about how much he loves the kids and takes them on vacation, and legit seems like a much better dad than Robin Williams' character. I have a theory that Stu knew immediately that Mrs. Doubtfire was not an older British lady. I think he realized that it was Daniel, but understood that he was just trying to see his kids. The restaurant scene just confirms it for me, where he has almost no reaction to the unmasking. Whenever I think of Mrs. Doubtfire, or see it in my channel guide, which is at least once a week it's on TV almost every day it seems, I always think of when the TV show Arrested Development spoofed it in one of their episodes. And it was basically exactly that. Everybody knew, but they all just kind of ignored it. Story 7. Pagan Men from Far Cry 4. The country wasn't perfect, but by the time the protagonist rips through, no matter if they help the traditional male rebel or the modernist female rebel, things are just as bad or worse than before. The modernist lady turns the country into a giant opium farm, destroys the local traditional culture, and deports a teenage girl to ensure she doesn't get unseated herself. The traditionalist man, while not growing drugs anymore, still leaves the country really poor and forces everyone back into the most extreme portions of the local culture or religion. Pagan Men might have been scalping off the populace and being a jerk, but the rebels were poopy too. Story 8. Grand Admiral Thrawn on how the Death Star was a waste, and in order for the Empire to be effective, it needed a flexible navy with strong starfighters. Also, Thrawn was right on almost everything on matters in the Chiss Ascendancy and the Empire. The Death Star was a siege weapon. Before the super laser, a planet could put up its planetary shields and be immune from attack. The planet was also cut off from trade too. But planets are big, and so long as it's self-sufficient, it could, in theory, keep its shields up for decades. Ships would have to remain there, because the moment they leave, the planet lowers its shields and resupplies. This would require deploying a fleet to blockade the planet for years on end. That's a lot of star destroyers, babysitting a defiant planet for a very long time. It wouldn't take very many defiant planets putting up their shields to absorb the entire Imperial Navy on blockade duty. The Death Star completely changes this. It is powerful enough to shoot directly through shields, thereby making it impossible for a planet to go into siege mode. Thrawn was right about basically everything else, though, and the Death Star really should have been a smaller weapon. A more compact super laser, just big enough to pierce shields and take out the shield generator, would have been far more useful. Destroying an entire planet was grossly in excess. Hit the shield generators and the star destroyers can now land troops, rebellion crushed, and you don't need to lose an entire world of tax revenue to do it. Story 9. The Dad in the Lego Movie. Legit had the most impressive Lego city I've ever seen, and his kid was messing around and wrecking all the time and effort he put into it. They're expensive. The Lego Movie was good for me when I realized the plot was about a dad with a massive Lego set, trying to keep his collection pristine. Because that's definitely something I empathize with. Not only that, but the resolution of the conflict wasn't just the typical hero beats bad guy, but the dad realizing that his son was making these elaborate new creations with his Lego sets and decides to let him have fun and be creative with it. Story 10. I felt like they were grasping at straws to make Killmonger look bad in Black Panther. He was perfectly right about everything, and then, out of nowhere, he was just like, race war, we gonna subjugate the world. For no reason. But he was bad. I felt like the movie had less to say about colonization and more about the difference between Africans and African Americans. Killmonger was born and raised in the U.S. His mother was American. He was in the military. Evan Ross said, "He is one of ours," in a not-so-subtle hint that he wasn't Wakandan even if his father was. Instead, he was American. The only reason why Killmonger wanted to take over Wakanda was to seize their resources. He couldn't care less about their culture. He did not want to learn about the customs and traditions. He didn't even want to eat their food. He was every bit a colonizer than any European of old. It reminded me of other Americans who go to Europeans and say things like, "Oh, I'm Irish too." No, you're not. You're American. You were born in Virginia and grew up in Kentucky. Just because you like to eat potatoes doesn't make you Irish. You only know about American culture. Killmonger was the same. Just because he scarred his skin doesn't make him Wakandan. He was an American who tried to overthrow an entire civilization for his own personal desire. That makes him wrong. Story 11. Walter Peck from Ghostbusters was a jerk, but the EPA absolutely needed to investigate the environmental impact of the Ghostbusters. Considering that they use a laser containment system, it's doubtful there would be anything for the EPA to worry about. Had a reasonably friendly EPA, Wonk had encountered Ray, the whole conflict would have likely been avoided. Each of us is wearing an unlicensed nuclear accelerator on his back. Yeah. I'm not sure precisely which government agency is supposed to be looking into the GBs, but the EPA is a decent start. These four guys have the ability to end all of reality, and they're like, "Mind your business, Mr. Government Man. Let me do my thing. I don't need oversight." We all promise not to end all reality. Story 12. Grinch. Especially the Jim Carrey version. Bullied as a kid for his green skin or fur, laughed at when he tried shaving, and got one-upped by his childhood bully in the present, the mayor, by giving him a razor as a joke proposing to the woman the Grinch liked right in front of him. The mayor was a jerk. This is actually why I dislike Grinch movies. It ruins the whole moral of the story if the Whovillians are jerks. At that point, don't make a Grinch adaptation. The point of the story is that the Grinch is bitter about other people being happy, so he tries to take away the joy of Christmas, only to find out that joy is not stored in material things, but in the heart. And once he opens his heart, he becomes happy. I love it because it's still so relevant to today, where people tirelessly try to fill their voids with shopping and addictions. And there are so many people who tear others down in an attempt to lift themselves up. Story 13. Agent Smith, Matrix, whole trilogy. Quote from Matrix 1, Interrogation of Morpheus. I'd like to share a revelation that I've had during my time here. It came to me when I tried to classify your species, and I realized that you're not actually mammals. Every mammal on this planet instinctively develops a natural equilibrium with the surrounding environment, but you humans do not. You move to an area, and you multiply and multiply until every natural resource is consumed. The only way to survive is to spread to another area. There is another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern. Do you know what it is? A virus. Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. You're a plague, and we are the cure. Today, I know Smith just knew better. Great pick. I have a different part of that conversation that I like. Agent Smith says that human beings define themselves by their conflicts. I find the virus a bit just factually wrong. Equilibrium in nature is fleeting and temporary. Ain't no species looking out for anyone but themselves. He's trying to demoralize Morpheus here, and he's reached too far imho. Story 14. The military command who wanted to firebomb the town in Outbreak to be compassionate globally, betting that scientists could find one monkey on the loose, assuming it could still survive far outside its natural habitat, and use it to make vaccines for everybody in the town before the disease spread, and all with 90s technology. Only worked because Hollywood. It's really hard to watch a lot of movies as a biologist, but this one was profoundly silly, leaving us wondering exactly how catching the monkey saved the town. It's probably comparable to the computer sci types watching, oh no, security lockout, type, okay, I'm in. Story 15. Killmonger and Black Panther. Wakanda is Saudi Arabia, complete with a social hierarchy stuck in the 1600s. A segregated feudal monarchy whose economy revolves around the mining and processing of a single resource commodity. Even their transfer of power has violence built into it. They provide their resources to fund small groups of extranational paramilitary fighters that align with and protect their views. It's like if a rogue Saudi prince decided that Saudi Arabia should stop funding al-Qaeda and stop manipulating the oil market for political gain. And they made a movie about how cool Mohammed bin Salman was when he beat up the other prince. Story 16. Another that had a point but was still wrong would be Light Yagami from Death Note. What he was doing was wrong. But he was right that society would improve if the corrupted and criminals were removed. With him doing his twisted deeds, crime worldwide had gone down drastically, if I remember correctly. He may have been the protagonist, but he was still the villain. Story 17. Count Dooku in Star Wars Episode 2. When he has Obi-Wan captive, he reveals to Obi-Wan that a Sith Lord, Palpatine, has infiltrated the Senate, and the Jedi Council is blind to it. Dooku tries to enlist OW to join forces with him to stop the Sith, but now refuses, believing that Dooku is the Sith, and everything that happens later is a result of that. That's semantically true, but Dooku was not the threat. He also wasn't trying to hide anything from Obi-Wan. Kenobi just telling him to piss off because they had an ideological difference got the galaxy the Clone Wars. If he had simply been willing to listen and cooperate, Dooku and Padme could have probably convinced the Senate to depose Palpatine immediately. What would happen next is an open question, since Dooku would effectively be in command of the Separatist army. In all likelihood, there still would have been a breakaway, but at least the Jedi would know Palpatine had manipulated them and created the clone army, and hopefully wouldn't use it to fight to maintain an openly corrupt union. Story 18. Xanatos, one of the recurring antagonists in Disney's Gargoyles, comes to mind. At his core, he's strongly a practical, if amoral, man, but is ultimately very pragmatic. Specifically in the four-part City of Stone, where Goliath was about to attack David for helping Demona curse the people of Manhattan to be turned to stone during the night. Xanatos bluntly told the gargoyle, "Do you want vengeance or a solution?" The two instead formulate a plan to break Demona's spell, one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite in the show. But while he was affable and at times helpful, he did some pretty bad stuff. Turning Elisa's brother Derek into a cat or Batman was a serious bad guy move, and he outright tried to get rid of the gargoyles a few times. Story 19. I don't know if he was right because I don't know what his true motivations were. But I remember watching the second Fantastic Beasts movie, which is set in the 1920s after World War I, which wizards fought in apparently. And no, we never get to see that. Cause why bother showing dogfights on Dragonback who needs cool crap like that in their movie? And Grindelwald, who's generally shown to be not a very nice chap at all, has his big rally where all the elite witches and wizards go, some of whom are World War I veterans, to find out what his big message is, what his plan is, and he shows them visions of World War II, complete with tanks, nuclear bombs, that there will be a new Great War, even worse than the previous one, and says he wants to take control to stop Muggles from destroying the world like this. And I was kind of just like, oh, okay, yes? Wait, the villain who lets his minions and babies wants to stop World War II, and am I supposed to root for the wizards who want to stop him? Like Grindelwald as a Cassandra-like figure, able to see the future but get no one to believe him and goes to extreme lengths to stop it himself for the greater good, while the good guys just think he's a power-hungry dictator, is an interesting premise, but I don't think that was what they were going for. To be fair, I haven't seen the third movie, so I don't know if it's expanded on at all. I didn't even know the third movie was done and released months ago. I guess it bombed, and I apparently missed it somehow. It was a very weird turn for the movie to take, and I'm still not sure what the hell, just what the hell. Story 20. Agent Smith from The Matrix. When he said every mammal on this planet instinctively develops a natural equilibrium with the surrounding environment, but you humans do not. You move to an area and you multiply and multiply until every natural resource is consumed. And the only way you can survive is to spread to another area. There's another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern. Do you know what it is? A virus. Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. Story 21. Gollum. All he wanted to do was have his precious to himself. It wasn't until it got stolen from him that Sauron found it and the whole crap show went down. He was literally keeping it secret and keeping it safe. Lord of the Rings wouldn't have happened had Bilbo not taken the ring, and then not have the fortitude that Gollum had to resist its influence. His whole goal in Lord of the Rings was to prevent the ring from making its way back to Sauron, and at the end was the catalyst for its destruction. Gollum was an incredibly tragic hero, and had Gandalf known more, he would have personally given the ring back to Gollum and helped him find an even deeper, darker cave to live out the rest of his days. Nah, the ring abandoned Gollum when it did, because it could sense that Sauron was returning. If it wasn't for the incredibly unlikely fact that Bilbo happened to be there to find it, it would have most likely been found by the goblins, who would have turned it over to Sauron's wraiths, leading to disaster. Plus, they literally have this conversation in the Council of Elrond. They could hide it again for as long as they could, such as giving it to Bombadil or lobbing it into the ocean. But eventually, it's going to turn up again. Sauron will never go away until it's destroyed. So hiding it is only prolonging the inevitable. And eventually, either someone has to destroy it or Sauron will reclaim it. Story 22. Everyone saying Thanos is right is kind of dumb. Like, sorta he had the right idea, but there were thousands of better improvements that could be made with the stones. He set the population back to the mid-1970s population. That's not doing much. That would barely put a dent in the problem he was trying to solve. In 50-ish years, the population would recover to the size it was at the snap. 100 max, if you account for declining fertility rates. Rates that would probably have bounced post-snap due to a sudden availability of resources. If he wanted to meaningfully reduce population, he should have snapped 90% of people away. That would set the population back to the mid-1700s. Maybe then birth rates would still bounce, but with modern education and birth control methods and culture, the population would not meaningfully recover for hundreds of years, possibly even never, depending on cultural shifts. Learn about exponential growth, you dummies. Story 23. Humanity in the X-Men films gets a bad rap. But I think if you look at the events from the average human perspective, the films kind of justify to a degree the fear of mutants and the increasingly hostile actions of the ones in power. To start off, X-Men mutants aren't shown to be treated any more poorly than any other minority. In X2, there's a major escalation, where because of the existence of Professor X, nearly all human and mutant life on Earth is nearly wiped out. This major event is unfortunately glossed over in the following films, but ultimately alone justifies humanity trying to stop mutations from happening, as well as the increasing fear of mutants. In X-Men 3, a cure is developed and distributed voluntarily, unless you're a major mutant criminal. This is met with mutant terrorist attacks, and a bunch of mutants breaking bridges and generally wrecking crap in big CGI battles. From there, you get two timelines. First, the worst, one day of the future past. Peace doesn't work, so giant murder robots are created to end all mutants. I will not argue that this is not bad. Even if they could end up accidentally ending someone, every mutant has the right to exist, just as every human does. That being said, I think after peace fails, giant murder robots are kind of an expected escalation. I think the Logan timeline has the best outcome for everyone, except the main characters. A cure is distributed through food and no new mutants are born. No one is hunted down and assassinated unless you're a main character. And the world is shown to be a better place because there's no mutants to pop and randomly start destroying cities. That sucks if you want to have superpowers, but it's overall pretty great for people who want to live a normal life. Story 24. The movie Battleship. The villain is so clearly human. Humanity sends out signals to aliens inviting them to Earth. Aliens came to Earth, but because our orbit is so littered with garbage, they collided with it and crashed into Earth. As soon as they crashed, they set up a force field to protect themselves. Earth, aka USA, sends out fighter planes to check it out, but crashes onto their force field. This left them with a sour taste and sent out patrol ships in the area to threaten the aliens. The first meeting, they instantly fired a warning shot towards the aliens, but instantly got shot back and destroyed instead. Humans, aka USA, declares war on the aliens they invited. The rest of the movie is just humans trying to end them, while the aliens are trying to de-escalate the conflict. There was even a scene where aliens could wipe out the human task force, but stood down because humans weren't a threat anymore. But of course, a few minutes later, humans repaid by blowing them up. Story 25. Admiral Dalen Proudmoore, Warcraft 3, was seen as someone who couldn't let his grudge against the Orcish Horde go. However, as more expansions of World of Warcraft were made, it was shown the Horde doing more nasty stuff, and even that they became evil without the intervention of the demons. All that stuff showed that he was right. Magneto, X-Men movies. He was always seen as the bad mutant who wants to eradicate humans in order to make a world better for the mutants he can rule, which made him one of the X-Men main enemies as they want peace and harmony between humans and mutants. In the movie Logan, we are shown that humanity pretty much assassinated most of the mutants. So, that alone makes Magneto in the long run, and all who supported him, as the one who was right.